gonna throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus, out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it! 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you as always. And tonight it is time to talk about the 2026 schedule for Carolina football, as the Tar Heels got that yesterday evening. And so we are here to break it down for you. One of the more difficult slates in all of college football that Carolina has on the horizon for this year. So we'll take a month-by-month look at what exactly the Tar Heels schedule looks like. We'll tell you some, little tidbits about each matchup for the Tar Heels, and then eventually get to our predictions in terms of a win-loss record at the towards the end of the podcast here. Then we'll talk to you guys about Super Bowl 60 from a Tar Heel perspective. Two Tar Heels, of course, going to the Super Bowl, two that we know for sure will be active in the game, one that may be active for the Seattle Seahawks as well. So we'll tell you about those guys and how they got there, how excited we are for them. We also got to talk about Bill Belichick not being elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The head coach of the Tar Heels seen as pretty much a layup to make it as a first ballot Hall of Famer this year. Not going to go in this season. He's going to have to wait until at least next year to be able to make the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And then we do have to also send out some thoughts and prayers to someone in the Tar Heel community that needs them badly right now. We'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of the podcast. But as I mentioned, Carolina gets their 2026 schedule. It was released last night at 6 o'clock as part of the ACC schedule release. They did it during that time, and then, of course, had their 1 hour special that they did. And so Carolina will play 6 games at home in Kenan Stadium in 2026. 4 of those games will be ACC games. 2 of those games will be non-conference games. 4 of the final 6 games will be at home. So that's something to look forward to for Carolina. Hopefully they can get a stronger finish to the year than they did this past year. Carolina will face 10 programs that have made a bowl game in 2025. That is a significant amount for Carolina. Shows you just how good a lot of the teams are. And the combined records of the opponents that are on their schedule from 2025 was 103-55. So this is an extremely, extremely successful group of teams that Carolina is going to be playing when they start their season on August 29th and as it carries throughout the fall of 2026. Let's start with the game that we know the most about, and that is the game against TCU. That's a game that we will be looking forward to for sure. Here is as we go throughout the offseason. But this one, of course, over in Ireland against the Horned Frogs as part of the Aer Lingus Classic. And this one, a huge one for Carolina to begin the season. Believe it or not, this is probably one of the most winnable games on Carolina's schedule. TCU going to have to find a new quarterback with Josh Hoover entering the transfer portal. There are some other guys, of course, that were on this year's team that came to Chapel Hill that have graduated. So going to be a little bit of a retool there for TCU this upcoming season under Sonny Dykes. But, they're going to be incredibly motivated. We saw how motivated they were to beat Carolina last year. You can imagine that they are not going to be, forgetting that anytime soon. The level of motivation that they had for that game, the level of disrespect that they felt towards their program coming into that game, because all the talk was about Carolina. And you would imagine that there will be a decent amount of talk again about Carolina coming into this year because they still have Bill Belichick on the sidelines. But when you look at this game, I mean, there's a lot of things that are important for Carolina to do this season. It feels like the game is a pretty important one, especially since there's only been one team in the history of this Aer Lingus Classic that has lost this game and made it to a bowl game, and that was in their initial season.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, a tone setter, but the game I don't think has the energy, the anticipation we thought it was going to have when this decision got announced. Whenever it got announced that TCU was forfeiting the right to host Carolina and this game got moved overseas. This was part of, really the what's the word I'm looking for here? I guess the exposure for the program that Bill Belichick brought and was, making Carolina a national global football brand. But, after you go 4-8, you do the types of things that Carolina did year one, and then you don't really put together a better roster in year two. I don't think there's the same anticipation for this game, but it's a game that could ultimately determine the way your season goes. The track record speaks for itself. Teams that win that game typically go on to have good seasons. The teams that don't, for whatever reason, they never seem to recover. So, for Michael Lombardi, Bill Belichick, they are promising that this freshman class is going to be the foundation of their program. They made an upgrade, we all believe, at the offensive coordinator position with the arrival of Bobby Petrino. You're going to be breaking in a new quarterback. We have to wait and see who that guy's going to end up being, but it's not an overreaction to say that whatever that result goes, and we hope it's a win, could ultimately determine how the season goes. Because even if Carolina were to win that game, the path to a bowl game is not as easy as it was a year ago. If Carolina were to lose that game, it's going to be pretty hard to see them envisioning going bowling. And I don't think that was something we ever thought would be possible back-to-back years with the Hall of Fame head coach and this program failing to make a bowl game after getting there consistently under Mack Brown.
Yeah, I mean, it would be shocking if that ends up happening, but with the slate that Carolina has, I don't think anybody is going to be completely stunned this year. You mentioned it, that the hype for this game is not going to be nearly where it was, especially coming in to last year's matchup or, at the time that this was announced. We thought that this was going to be one of the big games for Carolina that was, really going to be able to put this program back on the map. It wasn't, and to me, I think it's still hard pressed to think that the program was off the map under Mack Brown. I think they were on the map. It was just they underachieved in certain areas. But this was supposed to be one of those games that really showcased where Carolina was at. You were hoping that, by year two, Bill Belichick and his group would really be starting to challenge for, an ACC regular season championship, potentially going to the ACC championship game in year two after, a pretty good first season. And that's just not where Carolina is at all. You're looking for any type of positive momentum. And now you're going to have this game, a tough one against a TCU team that as I mentioned, does have to replace a lot, but they're coached by, Sonny Dykes, who's done a really good job there. They've always been a team that's been able to find some talent and really put together strong rosters since being in the Big 12. And so I would expect that they're going to be a very formidable opponent for Carolina right there. And you're right. This really sets the table for the entire season. Don't end up winning this game. You really look at a lot of the other games on the schedule. Carolina will be able to win. Should be the easiest game on the schedule for Carolina, no questions asked, and that would be the September 12th matchup with East Tennessee State. That is 2 weeks after the game against TCU, which is on August 29th. So Carolina will have plenty of time to fly back, get themselves back to Tennessee State. This is one of those teams that Carolina should be able to handle pretty easily in a season where there really isn't much that is a guarantee for Carolina. But this one, I know they went out and got Jaden Davis, who's a guy that was very successful in the state of North Carolina at the high school ranks. It certainly is a team that, in the past has been relatively successful on the football side of things. But, this is still one that if Carolina is going to have any sort of success this upcoming season, they are going to have to take care of this group, no questions asked. This past season for East Tennessee State, they went 7-5, 5-3 in conference play. They did not make it to the FCS playoffs, and so this is certainly going to be one of those games that Carolina should look at as an easy win on the schedule, and hopefully it'll be very similar to what we saw with Richmond. All right, we move on to the ACC opener. That'll be on the 19th of September as they play the Clemson Tigers. That will be at Clemson. This is the ACC opener for the second straight year for Carolina. They opened, of course, this past season with Clemson in what was a blowout loss for the Tar Heels. This is the first road trip to Clemson since the 2023 game. Of course, Carolina in that game, you'll remember multiple fumbles from Amari and Hampton, a big difference in that one. But, this is one of those ones, interestingly enough, if you're going to catch Clemson on this schedule, it feels like this is the place to catch them because they're still going to have some questions at the quarterback spot. There are going to be some guys that are getting adjusted out of the transfer portal, and there still is a lot that they have to replace due to graduation. So this actually feels like one of the more favorable draws for Carolina to get this Clemson team early in the season, as opposed to if they had to play them late. There are many breaks on the schedule, but this feels like one of them.
Yeah, and look, this could be a Clemson team that's licking its wounds after everyone's got to remember they opened the season at LSU, where that's going to be Lane Kiffin's, LSU debut. And let's just say for whatever reason, Clemson goes down there and gets waxed. The negativity that's is going to be permeating through that program about Dabo Swinney, who feels like he's maybe coming to his end of his time with that program. You probably like it better earlier than later. I'd still rather not play them at all because I don't think from a talent perspective, Carolina is on the same level with them. We saw that this past year where they rolled into town and the game was over in the middle of the first quarter for all intents and purposes. Clemson, they add Chad Morris back to their coaching staff. Chad Morris basically is how we feel about Bobby Petrino. That guy can coach offense. It doesn't matter who their quarterback is. They're going to put up points. They're going to put up yards. And as bad as Carolina was on the road at times last year under Belichick, do you think they'll be ready to go to an environment like Clemson and come away with the win? And the answer is probably no, which is why you put that TCU game and you put it in such high regard, because if you maybe get a win there, that could breed some confidence for you to go on the road and get a win like this. And when Belichick's going to be searching for defining wins in year two, I don't think it happens, but you just never know. The unfortunate thing is it feels like in this new era of ACC scheduling, as long as Belichick is on our sidelines, we're going to see Clemson as much as we can, because the league wants to have that matchup of him and Dabo going at it. Quite frankly, I'm tired of playing Clemson. We've played them, I think, quite a lot since 2019, and it hasn't gone our way any of those times that we've played them. So earlier in the season is better than later in the season, but nonetheless, it's really hard to be optimistic Carolina's ready to beat a program like the Clemson Tigers.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, going into this game, you're not thinking that Carolina is going to be able to win. It would be nice if Carolina could find a way to pull an upset in this one, but it's hard to envision based off of what you saw from Carolina last year against Clemson, how far the gap was between Carolina and Clemson on that field, and that was one of Clemson's lesser teams. I mean, you got to think, since Dabo has been there, outside of the first couple of years, first 3 years or so of the Dabo era, I mean, that was probably one of those types of teams that nearly got him fired before he went on the run that he would, where he eventually wins a couple of national championships for them. I mean, that team really struggled this past season, and now you're expecting that they're going to be just as bad or worse than that this upcoming season. I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment from Clemson. Will they be great? Will they be a team that's competing to win a national championship again? I don't think so, because I just don't know about that quarterback situation there, but I still think this is going to be an incredibly difficult game for Carolina, and one that, is going to, take its toll on the team if they aren't able to put up a better fight than they put up this past year against them. Really, it's because, when you look at where this game is situated, they play this game and then they go on their second bye week of the season. And then after that, Carolina has 9 straight games to finish out the season. So again, very similar to last year, 2 early bye weeks for Carolina, and then they end up having to go through a gauntlet. Now, this one, much different than what they had this past season. Last year's schedule was very, very easy compared to this year's schedule, because you go to the month of October and it starts with the game against Notre Dame. First home game against Notre Dame since 2022. This is one that, again, you basically ask yourself, why in the world did Carolina have to draw Notre Dame? And I know it's been a while since Carolina's played them. They were bound to draw them at some point, but it just feels like this year of all years, you didn't want to necessarily have to draw them. So this is probably, when I look at it, Carolina's toughest game of the entire season. I think that Miami is certainly right there, especially after they just got Darian Mensah out of the portal. But Notre Dame's going to be one of those teams that's going to challenge to win the national championship again this season. I think Miami's going to be right in that conversation as well. So it is debatable whether or not this is the toughest game that Carolina faces. But with CJ Carr coming back, a lot of the standouts on the defensive side of the ball coming back for Notre Dame, you can expect that this will be one of the stiffest challenges that Carolina has to face this year.
Yeah, look, we know what Miami is supposed to add at quarterback. We know what they're going to add with Cooper Barkate as well. Until that's official, I think Notre Dame on paper is the best team that Carolina will face. And that's saying something, considering you got to host the reigning national champions as well, all in the same month. And you said that it's been a while since they played Notre Dame. It's only been 3 years, because you got to go back. It was Drake May's his last season that he was the last time that Notre Dame and Carolina matched up. The game's in Chapel Hill, which will create maybe the best environment of the season, because we've seen what those Notre Dame crowds have looked like. We got the pleasure to go watch them a few years ago for my birthday. Got our asses kicked. Nonetheless, this will be, I think, a measuring stick game of sorts to really see just how far Carolina football has come under Bill Belichick, because the last time they were in our building, they were skull drugging us up and down the football field. Mack Brown had inconsistent outings against the Fighting Irish during his second stint with the program. So I think you like the fact that it's coming off of a bye week. So you'll have 2 weeks to prepare. You'll be as healthy as you probably could be going into that game. The problem is that game kicks off 9 straight games to close out the regular season, and that's as physical as a football team as you're going to play. You'd probably like to have that second bye week after the Notre Dame, going to try to get healthy with that physical brand of football. So, Carolina's not lacking having to play, premier programs in the early going. And there's no doubt about it, after the Fighting Irish leave Chapel Hill the first Saturday in October, we're going to know just exactly where this program measures up against some of the best the sport has to offer.
Yeah, and I got to be honest, I don't think it's going to really be all that great. I don't think that Carolina is going to necessarily stack up well against these teams. So I think the next question that you have to ask is, okay, if you get off to a 1-3 start to the season, or, even if you get to a 2-2 start to the year, how is Carolina able to respond in this next stretch of games here? I mean, they play 5 games in the month of October. The second game after the game against Notre Dame, you go on the road a week later to Pittsburgh on a Saturday. One thing that is notable, no Thursday or Friday games for Carolina this year after they played a handful this past year. So, this game at Pittsburgh, not going to be easy. Carolina for a while there owned Pittsburgh after they moved to the ACC, but that hasn't necessarily been the case in recent years. This Pitt team going to be an interesting one. There's no doubt about that. They do end up losing some important pieces on the defensive side of the football, especially linebacker Rasheem Biles, who entered the transfer portal. But they still are going to have Mason Heinschel that's going to be back. He is one of the better young quarterbacks in the ACC, coming off of a really strong performance this past year. I mean, that was a team that was on the borderline of being ranked inside of the top 25 for most of the season. They had a couple of stints inside of the top 25, and you would imagine that's probably going to be where they're going to be again this next year. So another stiff test for Carolina, having to go on the road to Acrisure Stadium to take on the Pitt Panthers. I think this is another one, though, where we talk about some of the games that Carolina must win if they want to make a bowl game. I think TCU fits in that category, and I think Pittsburgh's probably another game that you look at and probably circle on the schedule and think, if Carolina is going to make a bowl game, they're going to have to probably find a way to beat the Pitt Panthers.
Dan, I think it's the first of 3 straight games where you feel like you need to get wins in a month of October that starts with Notre Dame and ends with Miami. 2 teams I think they're going to factor into the national championship conversation next year in college football. And you're right. For the longest time, Carolina had Pittsburgh's number. That was a Larry Fedora thing where I don't think he ever lost to Pittsburgh during his time as Carolina's head coach. Hasn't been the same for Mack Brown, or wasn't the same for Mack Brown once he got back. And of course, this will be the first meeting under Belichick. And at some point, man, like this, you got to be able to go on the road and win in conference. And this is going to be one of those games that I think you're right. If you're trying to find a way to get to 6 wins, and you're trying to be realistic, this is one of those games that could be the swing game. Like, Carolina wins this game, I think that math becomes a lot easier. It's a lot, you can talk yourself into 6 wins. If you don't think they can go on the road and beat a Pitt team that's going to be good, but they're not going to be challenging you wouldn't imagine for an ACC championship, then I think that math becomes a lot harder. I think you like where it is in the schedule, where it's early October, so it's not late October or going into November, where the weather in that area really starts to change. So I think you got to like that aspect of it. They usually play fun, competitive, high-scoring games when these 2 teams link up. Hopefully, it'll just be one that Carolina will be able to put enough points on the board, because I do think they win this game, there's a path to a bowl game. They lose that game, I do think it's harder to see this program getting a postseason invitation.
Yeah, and I think the next game fits into that category as well. You said 3 straight games really for Carolina on the schedule. Well, the October 17th game at Duke certainly fits that scenario as well. You know, the battle for the victory bell. Carolina's lost back-to-back games against the Duke Blue Devils. This is one of those games you absolutely have to have. I get it. Duke is a rival. It's not going to be easy, and no one's saying that it's going to be easy. But this is a team that's losing their starting quarterback, and they're losing him at a time where they are not really able to replace him in the transfer portal. There still are some guys that are out there. I would imagine that they are going to take a risk on somebody that hasn't yet been scooped up at the quarterback position. But it's not a great group. It's not one that you would have had available to you if Darian Mensah had made his decision earlier. So, I mean, yeah, we've talked about it, a lot on, our local sports station. This is a team that kind of got screwed by how the NCAA is doing things right now in terms of these contracts that are being given out, guys not necessarily sticking to the contracts. And so, and entering the portal and going to new schools. So while it does help one of the opponents that's on the schedule for Carolina, going to make that game a lot more difficult. This game without Darian Mensah, without Cooper Barkade, that's arguably the best quarterback in the ACC that's gone. That's arguably a top 10 or top 5 receiver in the ACC that is also gone off of your roster from this past year. I think this is one of the games that you look at on the schedule and circle and say, Carolina's got to find a way to win this one, even though it's on the road at Duke. And you need to break that losing streak to the Duke Blue Devils because, yeah, this is a team that's been successful over the last handful of years. Manny Diaz is doing a pretty good job there to start out his tenure, but still you feel like this is one that you should be able to pick up in this upcoming season if you're looking to get to a bowl game.
Yeah, look, they're the reigning ACC defending champions, but they're not the same team that won an ACC championship the year prior. You've lost back-to-back years. Some of it, 2 years ago, you blew a 20-0 lead. That was really the beginning of the end of Mack Brown's second tenure with the program. This past year, you lost to them at home. With the way the season had played up to that point, you didn't expect to win. But that was a game that you could probably argue of all the games that Carolina lost, where they competed for as much as they could and just fell a few plays short. That and the Virginia game were two games where you really felt like Carolina battled and just did not get the result that they wanted. And we thought with the way that Belichick treated rivalry games at the NFL level, that same animosity preparation would carry over to the college level. We watched him go, pretty much 0 for losing to every major rival that we consider a year ago. And so trying to go into their building, not the easiest thing in the world. But depending on where Duke season is at, their fan base could be like where we're at usually sometimes in October, just getting ready for the start of basketball season. But this is another game that I do think when you're trying to do the math and you're trying to find a way to realistically get to 6-6 and get a bowl game, I do think a road win at Duke has to be factored in, and I don't think Carolina football fans could stomach 3 straight losses to the Blue Devils on the gridiron.
Well, especially because, as you said, this is a rivalry matchup with them, and this is the one that we thought, Belichick would be able to take care of. Billy's first words were beat Duke. So we thought there would be that extra animosity. We thought there'd be that extra level of fight from Carolina. And, we saw it in moments in that game, but it certainly wasn't where it needed to be for Carolina to be able to win. Now against what will be an easier team to face this year in the Duke Blue Devils, as opposed to what you just saw come to Chapel Hill this past year, you're hoping that Carolina is able to get it done. But again, this is a road game, so things aren't necessarily going to be easy for Carolina in this matchup. But this is one that, again, you look at it, this might, depending on who they get at quarterback, this might be the easiest conference game that you play the entire season. And so you've got to find a way to get that one done. There's no doubt about that. Then you go back home on October 24th and you take on the Syracuse Orange, another team that, again, if you're going to find your way into a bowl game, you've got to find a way to beat this team. Now, I expect that Syracuse is going to be much better than they were this past year when Carolina faced them. Remember that they had lost quarterback Steve Angeli. Start of the year, solid team, a team that looked like they were going to continue to progress under Fran Brown. Once Angeli went down and that quarterback position became an issue, that was really the end of the season for Syracuse. This year, they're hoping that they're going to have much more success with keeping Angeli healthy. If they're able to do that, they've also got a group that, coming off of this past year was pretty young. And so they've got an extra year of experience under their belt. I think it's going to be a better team that rolls into Chapel Hill in this game to face the Tar Heels. But again, it's one that Carolina's got to be able to have. There shouldn't be that much of a talent gap between Carolina and Syracuse. You would imagine they're going to be very similar in terms of the amount of talent that'll be on the field. So this is one that Carolina has to come away with, especially with it being in Kenan Stadium.
Yeah, look, with Angeli back, you know that they'll be better than the team that Carolina beat a year ago. Up at the JMA Wireless, or whatever the hell they call that building now. But regardless, this game at home, you have to have this type of win, on the schedule to achieve some things you want to achieve in year 2 under Bill Belichick. We all know Fran Brown's a character, as good a quote as there is in the ACC, as good a quote as there is in college football. I don't want to give that guy a chance to talk after beating a guy like Bill Belichick while coaching at Syracuse. So, I look at that slate and how Carolina does in those 3 games at Pitt, home to Duke, home to Syracuse. I do think, or at Duke, I do think those games will determine how the season goes one way or another. If Carolina goes 3-0 with the bye game against East Tennessee State, you only got to find 2 other wins on the schedule. I think there's a pathway to seeing this team taking that step forward that Michael Lombardi and Bill Belichick have talked so much about since the season came to an end. If they can't get that one at home before you play against a team like Miami in a month that also features a home game against Notre Dame, it's probably going to be a sign that Carolina is not ready to take that step under Belichick. And that's really going to call into question, did they make a mistake in hiring if they miss a bowl game for back-to-back years? So, we'll see how this ultimately plays out. I do think Syracuse being on the schedule could be a blessing in disguise for Carolina looking to get back to the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most advantageous stretches that you have on the schedule. It's the most advantageous stretch that you have on this schedule. So you've got to be able to take advantage of it. Garrett, for you to have any chance, you at least have to go 2-1. And that is that is with the thinking that you have won the season opener probably against TCU. You've won that game against East Tennessee State. And then you can go 2-1 in that stretch. If you lose the opener to TCU, you are 100% right. You have to go 3-0 during that stretch, because if you do, and you've got that East Tennessee State win under your belt as well, then it's about finding those other 2 wins on the schedule. There are some games that Carolina could have a chance at in the month of November, but they're going to have to bring much more intensity than they brought this past year down the stretch in order to do that. October 31st, another game on Halloween for Carolina. This one will be on a Saturday, though. They take on the Miami Hurricanes. They'll be welcoming them to Kenan Stadium. And look, here's the thing. Carolina has had a lot of success against Miami since Miami has come into the ACC. This is a different Miami team. The U, I think, is officially back after this year. I know people have said that in the past, and we thought that things were going to turn in the right direction for the program, but it doesn't feel like it felt this past year, where with the money that is being spent by Miami, the guys they're going to expect to bring back this year, and some of the portal additions that they made to make up for some of the departures that they're going to have, especially at that edge rusher position. I think this is a group that's going to be really good again this coming season. As we mentioned, we've got to figure out whether or not Darian Mensah and Cooper Barcade are officially going to go there. You add them to the mix. This is right up there with that game against Notre Dame. I mean, it's competing with that one for the toughest game of the season. This one, I'm not going to say it's impossible for Carolina to win, but this would be an absolute stunner if the Tar Heels are able to come away with a victory against a team that should be fighting for a national championship and a quarterback who could be seeing himself on the way to New York by the time this game is being played.
Yeah, we've been able to see some fun, dramatic wins over Miami at home in Keenan. Don't think this is going to be one of those. This might be one that this thing could get out of hand because I think Mario Cristobal has built Miami back. I think the U is back if you want to use that saying. And so for some of those games early on in the year, like TCU and Clemson, those could be measuring sticks. This could be one that's very eye-opening about the talent gap disparity that exists between a program like Miami that pretty much up until Belichick, Carolina has been very competitive with, in the last 15 to 20 years. So, look, maybe the fact that it's on Halloween will be spooky, something crazy happens. But I'm more, I guess I don't want to say I'm more confident when talking about a loss. But I don't see a scenario when we get in season. I talk myself into Carolina winning this game. Depending on what they do against TCU, what they do against Clemson, could I talk myself into them beating Notre Dame at home? I probably could. I don't see a scenario when we get to Miami game week where I find a way to convince myself that Miami is going to come into Chapel Hill and get beat. And hopefully that's something that the coaching staff has taken to heart and realize just how much work they do to chase not the ACC champions, but the CFP runners up in a program that feels like they're back in a big way on the national stage that we've been asking for the last 20 years.
Yeah, the only way you could talk yourself into this game is if somehow Carolina comes into this game with 5 wins on the season, potentially. Maybe they do end up upsetting Notre Dame. I mean, that would go a long way towards being able to talk yourself into this game. But even if not, if they do end up winning that opener against TCU, they win that game against East Tennessee State, and then they win those 3 straight that we talked about, maybe you could convince yourself with the momentum that Carolina has. Maybe Miami comes in overlooking them a little bit. We know that, it wasn't a perfect ACC slate for Miami this past year on the road to making it to the CFP final. But certainly it feels like this is one of those games that's going to be incredibly difficult to talk yourself into thinking that Carolina is going to be able to win. Then you go to the month of November for the Tar Heels. Again, no breaks in this stretch here, 9 straight games to close the season. And so on November 7th, Carolina going on the road to UConn. This is a true toss-up game because we don't really know what exactly UConn is going to be. They lost head coach Jim Mora Jr. in earlier on this offseason. End up hiring Jason Candle from Toledo. Very solid hire, a guy that did some really good things with that Toledo program. But we just don't know what exactly it's going to look like for this UConn group. Still, Carolina does have to go up there to East Hartford. That's going to be a difficult environment to go into, especially that time of year. There could be some elements for that game. Could be bitter cold that Carolina's having to face in that game. And it's the first road game that Carolina will play at UConn since 2009. Of course, the Tar Heels went up there and won 12-10 in that matchup. That was the game that everyone will remember for Bruce Carter's success on special teams. And I think that is, one of the recipes that Carolina may have to dig back up if they're going to find a way to win a game like this. A lot of change over there in East Hartford, but the thing is you look at the success that they've had the last couple of years. It's not impossible to think that UConn's going to be a team that just keeps on rolling and being a consistent bowl team that could challenge Carolina in this game.
I think back-to-back 9-win seasons for UConn football. There's energy, there's life, there's a care factor again with that program, which it's good to see because when UConn was good in the mid-2000s, it was one of the more like unique environments in all of college football. I think this game sets the tone for the final month. and it could be one that sets a tone that Carolina maybe goes 3-1 and they get into a bowl game. But if they were to lose the game, does it go sideways and Carolina goes 1-3, they fall short? We're going to have an honest conversation about Bill Belichick and the coaching staff here on the podcast. That win at UConn back in 2009, one of my favorite wins as a young Carolina football fan. I remember Zach Pianalto catching a very important touchdown in that win for Carolina that day. Would love to see them recreate it. This is a program that's in transition, but nonetheless, as we know in this conference, it's not easy to go on the road and win, and Carolina's going to have to do that in that game if they do want to maybe put themselves in position to compete for a chance to go to a bowl game.
Yeah, and then you move on to the next game, and the reason why it's so important is because of this finish that you have. Carolina at home against Louisville on November 14th. This is the first visit for the Cardinals to Chapel Hill since 2017. Of course, we all remember that game. That was the game where Lamar Jackson absolutely lit up a Larry Fedora defense, which, I mean, well, you know how that goes when you have a quarterback that's as successful as Lamar Jackson and a defense that struggled the way that Larry Fedora's defenses struggled, especially late in that 2017 and then 2018 seasons for Carolina. So this is going to be another tough one. You know, Louisville is a team that every year at this point, they are completely rehauling their group, overhauling the group through the transfer portal. So they have reloaded again this year. They've done it. They've gone out. They've gotten some guys, you know, in the trenches. There's, of course, some skill position players that they brought in the transfer portal that are really talented as well. Biggest question is going to be their quarterback spot. Lincoln Kienholz is coming over from Ohio State. He was a guy that almost won that starting job this past year from Julian Sayin, but Sayin, of course, eventually takes the job, leads Ohio State to a pretty successful regular season, and then, unfortunately for them, they bow out early in the college football playoff to Miami. But this is a guy that isn't nearly as proven as some of the other guys that they've brought in here, doesn't have nearly the amount of starts under his belt, doesn't have a single start in his career under his belt. So a little bit of a wild card at the quarterback position still. Many people expecting Louisville to be pretty good, especially under Jeff Brom, who's been one of the more consistent, if not the most consistent coach in the ACC since taking the head coaching job. So another stiff test for the Tar Heels, even though this one will be in Kenan Stadium.
Yeah, and look, depending on what kind of season Louisville is having, Brom could be being linked to whatever big-time opening is going to come up because that's how respected of a coach that he is. The fact that this is just, the second or the third meeting all time between the two schools as ACC foes is pretty wild as well, considering how long that Louisville's been in the conference as a football member. And it's the first time they're coming to Chapel Hill in nearly a decade. And I think most years you would think probably Louisville's going to win the football game because they've been really good. They've been really consistent, but they also have had some really hot starts that have been cooled down by some really bad finishes, whether it's been because of injury or just their quarterback kind of getting figured out. Whatever the case has been, they've never finished seasons the way like you would have liked them to, or their fan base would have liked them to, after putting themselves in legitimate position to maybe even get to as far as an ACC championship. So, with this being the first of the final 3 games at home, for as much as maybe Pittsburgh is a tone setter for the month of October, I feel like the Louisville game could be the tone setter for the month of November, because if Carolina can get to the point where they're playing high-level football at home and they're defending Kenan Stadium, maybe they'll be ready to win the type of game they got to win at the end of the regular season against NC State, or go on the road and win a game at Virginia and avenge a tough loss from last year's loss in the South's oldest rivalry.
Yeah, I mean, look, Louisville is one of those games where you could probably talk yourself into making that pick as a win for Carolina. At this point in the offseason, It's not impossible, but at the same time, I mean, I do think that still is one of the more difficult games that you could have drawn in the ACC for this upcoming season. Still think that's going to be a team that's probably going to win 8 games, but you brought up a good point. That's a team that has gotten off to really hot starts and has really slowed down towards the end of the end of these last few seasons. And so maybe that is some recipe that pops up again this year. And maybe that's the way that Carolina can potentially get an upset over Louisville and get themselves a step closer to a bowl game. Another way that they could do that is if they can go on the road at Virginia and win. November 21st on the road at the Cavaliers. This is, of course, the South's oldest rivalry. So yet again, another rendition of that. Carolina came very close to pulling the upset this past year against a really good Virginia team, a team that went to the ACC championship. Certainly a group that I think you're looking at and thinking now are things a little bit different under Tony Elliott. They go out in the portal after winning 11 games this season. First time in a long time that's happened for Virginia football. And so they go out in the portal and get 2 quarterbacks to come in, Bo Pribula from Missouri, and then of course Eli Holstein making the transfer in conference from Pittsburgh, also going to be there. So they got 2 quarterbacks that they can decide between. You'd imagine by this point in the season, they'll have their starting quarterback figured out. And this will be a team that could once again challenge to at least make a bowl game, if not, win 8-9 games again this upcoming season. So not going to be an easy game for Carolina, especially because they have to go on the road to Scott Stadium for this one.
Yeah, and look, you're going to be looking for revenge after a difficult loss last year at home where Carolina played good enough to win the game but did not come away with the win. We're going to learn a lot about Virginia and where that football program is at. Was this a one-year wonder, getting to an ACC title game? You mentioned winning 11 games. Or do they benefit from taking care of a soft schedule? We're going to find out. Regardless, don't want to stomach back-to-back losses to Virginia. We value this rivalry game. It means a lot to us. So when we lose it, it does suck. And so that's why I really put the importance on the Louisville game the week before it, maybe setting the tone for you to go on the road and win a place that at different times in your football program's history has been a house of horrors. There have been different times where Carolina's walked right in there and played really, really well and won the game convincingly. The majority of my lifetime, though, they've gone in there and played tough games. And that's got to be something that this team's got to do this year under Belichick if they do want to take the improvement that they've been trying to sell the media. They've got to be able to win games away from home. They got to be able to take that next step as a football program. You were 0-4 in rivalry games in his first year, considering you lost to Duke State, Wake Forest, and Virginia. You'd like to get that turned around, and you'd like to enter that regular season finale, whether bowl hopes are on the line or not, with some momentum and some confidence that you can finally beat your heated rival from Raleigh.
Yeah, I mean, and that's going to be the final game of the regular season for Carolina once again. It's the 6th straight year that Carolina has concluded the season against NC State. Of course, the reason why they didn't that year in 2020 was because of the pandemic, but they've been playing NC State at the end of every normal regular season since 2014. And so this is, another one of these matchups that Carolina, you would think, if they're going to make a bowl game, this is probably one of the games that they have to find a way to win. The thing is that you probably shouldn't hold your breath that Carolina is going to be able to win this one. 5 straight losses to NC State. And look, NC State's had some good teams during that time. They've also had some teams that Carolina should have been able to beat. And that this past year wasn't even close in Raleigh. So Carolina is going to have to be much better than they were this past season. This game is at home for Carolina, so that's going to be a little bit of an advantage, hopefully, for this Tar Heel team this year. by this point in the season, you will hopefully have built up some momentum. Some of the freshmen that will be playing important roles will hopefully have grown up a little bit. And this could be a team in Carolina that could be playing better football than they were earlier in the season. But this is one of those games that I find really hard to predict in favor of Carolina until you actually see it, because NC State has just been so dominant recently in this rivalry.
Yeah, that's a fair thing to say. You cannot argue that. I think this game is how 99% of rivalry games exist within fan bases. I think no matter what Carolina does or doesn't do, if they can beat State, it could either be the icing on top of the cake to what was a really good season, or it could maybe mask another disappointing year for Bill Belichick. If they were to go 4-8, 5-7, but there's a win next to the NC State on the schedule, maybe that's a little bit easier to swallow, because I know we're all tired of losing to them. I know I am. I know you are, and I know many Carolina fans are, because we don't hear the end of it, and it's one thing after another from them. So I'd like to finally shut them up. I'd finally like to beat them, and get back to at least being competitive in the rivalry. I know Mack Brown had a run where won a couple games against them. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't know, but I'd like to at least get back to at least winning every other year against them, because it's felt a lot longer than even it's been since we got a win over that team in red.
Yeah, it's the absolute worst. I mean, it is the worst feeling every year when you see that game come up on the schedule. You know that Carolina is, probably going to find a way to lose that game. That's how you've looked at it over the past few years, and it sucks that we're at that point where we should be a little bit more confident going into that game. This is always the most important game of the season. I mean, to me at this point, it almost doesn't even matter what you do the rest of the year. As you mentioned, if Carolina comes into this game 4-7 and there's not even a bowl game on the line, even if you if you find a way to win this game, even if you don't make a bowl game, I still believe that Carolina would have some momentum going into next year. And that's the most important thing, just finishing the season off with a little bit of momentum. It just feels like every year Carolina is never able to do that because they cannot win this game. So I would love to, shut them up and finally get a win over NC State. But I do think that coming into this year, it's going to be pretty difficult to see that. Even with all the guys that they ended up losing, they do have a lot of guys that they end up having to replace, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So it's not impossible that Carolina wins this game, but it just feels like it's so hard to predict that going into the season because of the lack of success that Carolina has had recently. All right, you look at this schedule. What is your win-loss prediction for this season? We'll just give the records. If you want to say who you have Carolina beating, then you can, of course, do that. But when you look at this schedule, what do you see lying ahead for Carolina?
I'll give them 6-6 because I think you got a difference at your coordinator spot. That's going to maybe win you a few more games that you weren't able to win a year ago. And I'm just not ready to admit, as a Carolina fan, pro Belichick hire, that this team is going to miss a bowl game back-to-back years. So I don't think they take a substantial step forward, but I do think they at least get to a bowl game. I've got them as we sit here January 27th. We've still got to go through spring ball, where we'll learn a lot more about this roster. I've got the Heels making a bowl game, qualifying at it with just a 6-6 record.
Yeah, I got Carolina at 4-8, 2-6 in the ACC. I think the wins are East Tennessee State. I think they win at Duke. I think they beat Syracuse, and I think they win at UConn. I think that this team is going to struggle with all of the youth that they are going to have, especially early on in the schedule. That's what really sucks, is that Carolina gets off to such a difficult start. You wonder where, not only the momentum is going to be at, but where the mindset is going to be at for Carolina if they get off to a slow start yet again this year. I think pretty much guaranteed it's a 1-3 start. I don't see how they're going to beat TCU in Ireland. I think that's a very tough game for Carolina, especially with all the youth that they're going to have. Then you got the game against Clemson. I think that even though Clemson isn't necessarily going to be contending to make it back to the national championship game, they will be a good enough team to be able to handle Carolina, maybe hopefully not in similar fashion to what we saw this past year, but you never really know. And then I think that game against Notre Dame, just way too difficult to see Carolina winning that one. And so with that, I think, that will lead to some other losses on the schedule. At Pitt, I think it's definitely a toss-up. That was one of the games I kind of went back and forth on. Same thing with the game against Louisville. I think that's another toss-up where Carolina could potentially get it. But the other thing is that I don't see them beating NC State at the end of the year. Notice that wasn't one of the games that I gave them, just because, again, I need to see it to believe it for this team. So I think there will be some progress as the season goes along. I do think that there will be some competitive games for Carolina down the stretch, which will at least show us that maybe things are heading in the right direction. But I also wouldn't be shocked if Carolina ends up flushing the Bill Belichick experience after year 2 if they end up going 4-8. And I think this schedule is just so difficult that I could definitely see that happening. All right, let's get to some more positive stuff for Carolina. Some stuff that happened over the weekend. 3 former Tar Heels advanced to Super Bowl 60 against, it'll be the Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks, who will be going head-to-head in Santa Clara in just a couple of weeks from now. Quarterback Drake Maye, of course, for the Patriots, and wide receiver Mack Hollins will be guys that are guaranteed to be playing in the game. Mack Hollins just activated off the IR prior to the game on Sunday that they played in the AFC Championship game. There is another guy that could be on the active roster for this game. That would be Chaz Surratt for Seattle. But unfortunately, he is dealing with an injury, so not sure whether or not they are going to get him back for the Super Bowl. But if he is healthy enough, I believe that he is a guy that is part of their 53-man roster, part of their special teams group, and so they probably would end up activating him. But just wanted to say congratulations to Drake, congratulations to Mack Hollins. Wasn't the best performance from the Patriots, hasn't been the best performance from the Patriots here in the playoffs. Their offense has really struggled. Drake's had some issues holding on to the football, but at the same time, in this game where Drake needed to make the plays down the stretch, he was able to do so. And so in his second season at the NFL level, he is going to the Super Bowl. Mack Hollins, this will be his second Super Bowl. He was, of course, a part of the Eagles Super Bowl team that won back in 2018. And so he's looking for his second Super Bowl ring. He had a big catch in the game on Saturday on Sunday, on the flea flicker from Drake, probably Drake's best throw of the entire day, and what was not one that he will want to look back on and put many of those throws on his highlight reel, but that was definitely one of them that he will look fondly back on, and part of the reason why the Patriots were able to win that game. I think this is huge for Carolina. I mean, this is the first time that they're going to have a starting quarterback that's made it to a Super Bowl. I think a lot of Tar Heel fans are excited for this game, but if you're Drake Maye, if you're Mack Hollins, you have to be better. You have to be much better than you've been so far during the playoffs if you're going to find a way to win this game over the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, it's just really cool seeing, I think, the national media really embrace the next great quarterback of New England. And even though he's not played well in the postseason, in just his second year, he's taken that proud franchise back to the Super Bowl, and being able to do so, with a team, not with a former teammate of his, but a teammate that went to Carolina, makes it all the more neat. Mack Hollins is as interesting a character as there is now in the NFL with the way that he commutes to and from football games. So hats off to them. They played, well enough to get a win in snowy Denver to advance to the Super Bowl. And then, Chaz Surratt, the guy that, if he never made the position switch, is not here today, is not on a roster that's going to the Super Bowl. But he made the switch from quarterback to linebacker, made it look a lot more seamless than anyone could have maybe have thought going in. And he's not had a productive NFL career, but he's made a lot of money, being a special teams guy and doing a bunch of other things. You'd love to have him healthy on the sidelines or on the roster going into this game. Regardless, great ambassador moment for Carolina football. They've got 3 guys in the Super Bowl, one of them being the starting quarterback. And whether you can talk about they fully developed him or not, how many schools can boast that they've put a quarterback in the NFL that went to a Super Bowl in year 2? There aren't many. You get a win that can become something that this staff uses as a selling point when they're recruiting high school kids or the transfer portal. It should be a great game. Should be a fun game. I know we'll be pulling for Drake Maye, but at least if he falls short, there's at least one other target we can be happy for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that I'm looking at it. I'm hoping for sure that Drake does end up getting it done. That's I think in order to do that, as I said, they've got to definitely play better on the offensive side than they've been playing. I mean, that offensive line needs to be much better at protecting Drake than they have been throughout the playoffs. It's going to be a tough test. Seattle's got one of the better defenses in the league as well. So this has really been a gauntlet that Drake has gone through against some of the tougher defenses in all of football. He's gone up against some really good edge rushers too. I mean, you've seen some guys really have success. I mean, they Chargers, one of the more underrated edge rusher duos in the entire sport. That certainly is a group that was able to have some success against them. We know how good Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are for the Texans. They had a big day against them. And then Nick Benito and the Denver front also had a lot of success. It's going to be up to that offensive line to protect Drake a little bit better, but also Drake's got to be able to make some of those throws down the field that he was able to make during the regular season. I trust that he's going to be able to reel it back in. He's a guy that, we've seen play in big games before, never really been a guy that's crumbled in those types of situations. It's really been a lot of the guys around him that have ended up crumbling, similar situation to what he had towards the end of his seasons at Carolina with where the offensive line is at. So I'll be interested to see how he plays in this game. I think this could be his best performance of the playoffs coming up here, because he's probably hearing the noise that a lot of people say he didn't deserve to be here. This is a team that was carried by their defense. So I expect that he is going to put together a strong performance in the Super Bowl and hopefully give us a classic that we can remember, and most importantly, get that win in his second season, which would be an amazing, amazing feat for him. One other thing we got to talk about on the pro football side of things, Bill Belichick not elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame earlier today. That means he is not going in first ballot, did not receive 80% of the votes that were needed to make it in as a coach. There's 50 votes. You need 40 to be able to make it in. He did not meet that number, and so unfortunately, he will not be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Bill Polian, the former general manager at a couple of different places in the NFL, was apparently the guy leading the charge to leave him out due to Spygate and Deflategate, saying that they caused damage to the sport. And so that's the reason why a lot of these guys that ended up voting, it appears, against Bill Belichick, it looks like that was the reason why they ended up voting against him. I think this is absolutely crazy. I mean, you're talking about the greatest coach in the history of the sport. I don't, as I've said many times here on this podcast, I don't have the most glowing opinion of him, especially at this point, from a Carolina perspective. But at the same time, I mean, this is just anybody that has a brain in that is around the sport of football would know that this man should have been in first ballot. I mean, the amount of success that he had in his time as a head coach is certainly a big part of the reason. I mean, he has the most Super Bowl rings of any head coach in the history of the NFL with 6. He has the most conference championships with 9. He has the most playoff wins with 31. He has the most total wins or second most total wins with 333, and the third most regular season wins with 302. That, of course, doesn't even include the Super Bowl rings that he won as a member of the New York Giants coaching staff when he was the defensive coordinator in 1986 and 1990. What did you make when you found out this news earlier today that Bill Belichick would not be going into the Hall of Fame as a first ballot member?
Yeah, look, if Bill Belichick isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, what we have Hall of Fames for? He's the most accomplished professional sport. And like I know Phil Jackson won 11 titles in the NBA. I'd argue what Belichick did and the sustained success that he did is the most impressive thing we've seen in pro sports. In a league that, is not designed for him to do what he did, all he did was pretty much win the division every year, go to the conference title game every year, and more than often advance to the Super Bowl, and then win the Super Bowl more often than not. We can sit here and use Spygate and Deflategate as reasons why. I don't think, you also can't run from the fact that I think his personal relationship played a role in this, because it's the biggest hindrance, I do think, from teams calling him about their head coaching vacancies right now, because of the just a full blown distraction she proved to be during his first year back in college. It's not a good look for a guy like Bill Polian that I've thought really highly of for the majority of my sports fandom life. I've always been a fan of his when he was on TV, radio, whatever it was. But to see him kind of just tear down someone that, no one reveres Canton more than Belichick. What makes Belichick so unique is that he has this reverence for the game that you want all your coaches and players to have. And he wants to instill that into his own players. And he was waiting to get that call and to get that gold jacket and to go into Canton and be enshrined into football immortality. It's going to happen, but it should have happened right away. There should not have been a single person that did not vote for him to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And hopefully this leads to voting procedures being overhauled. And maybe at some point, man, we get the ballots, because we need to know who did not vote for him to be in the Hall of Fame. And when they need to be held accountable, because even if you use Spygate or Deflategate, what happened before what happened after Spygate to Deflategate was a Hall of Fame coaching career. And what happened after Deflategate was a Hall of Fame coaching career. So, Belichick hasn't done what we want him to do so far here at Carolina at the collegiate level. Can't argue what he did at the NFL level. Best head coach of all time. Arguably as innovative a defensive mind we've ever seen as defensive coordinator. And when you got 8 Super Bowl rings, that should count for something. So just another example that these Hall of Fames, they all have their flaws. It's not just Cooperstown in baseball. And today was a bad look for the National Football League that its greatest coach is not going into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot.
Yeah, an absolutely horrendous look for the sport of football. I think it really makes you question this group that is voting on this, as you said. I mean, we need names. We need to know who did not put this guy in first ballot, because you should not be voting for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. If you don't think this is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, I don't really know what to tell you. He is the most dominant coach that we have ever seen. He is a guy that, as you said, is one of the more innovative defensive minds that we have ever seen. And my thing about the Spygate and Deflategate stuff is, okay, well, if that's the case, well, then Tom Brady's not going in first ballot Hall of Famer either, right? He's going to be a guy that ends up having to wait because he was a part of both of those situations. So I don't understand how it's possible. I could not believe that when I saw that earlier today. I thought it was honestly a joke, coming from Adam Schefter at first. I thought, it was something that, was just overlooked. I thought maybe it was a misprint from Adam Schefter or something like that. And then to hear that, Bill Polian is the guy that's leading this entire charge. I mean, it's just asinine. I mean, Bill Polian, look, he is a guy that is very well respected for his football opinion, but you're also a guy that was part of a group in Indy that piped in crowd noise at one point during your tenure there. So, I mean, should that have been held against you? I mean, dude, I get it. You probably feel salty about all the years, the success that Belichick had against you. But at the same time, I mean, this is just a sad, sad day for the NFL. This is definitely one of those moments that makes you question everything about the league at this point and everything about the voting process at this point. Because, yeah, we've been here with baseball. And you said, one of the things is the relationships that he has. It doesn't matter, man. That stuff, I never understand why people worry about that stuff. I mean, we hear that all the time. Well, so-and-so might not go into the Hall of Fame, or they might have to wait because they're not necessarily a great guy. Guys, the Hall of Fame in sports is not filled with great people. Go back and look at some of the baseball players that were put into the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame, and you tell me how great a human some of these guys are. Ty Cobb is one of the worst human beings that's ever stepped foot on this planet. He was an absolute scumbag, and yet he is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He deserves to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame because of what he did during his time, playing the sport. That's what you're supposed to be doing, is putting in the best that have ever played the sport. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. Hopefully next year, Belichick will be able to get in. And, I really hope that they're not holding against him what is happening right now in Chapel Hill, because that has absolutely nothing to do with what he did at the pro level. I'm hoping that his relationship isn't being held against him either, because that has absolutely nothing to do with his football resume in general. So, we'll, of course, keep you updated on that news going into next year as to whether or not the head coach of the Tar Heels will eventually be put into the Hall of Fame. Last thing that I wanted to get to here before we close out this edition of the podcast, did want to say our thoughts and prayers for Mitch Mason, the former team chaplain for the Tar Heels. Unfortunately, he was moved into a hospice facility here just recently. He posted this update on social media yesterday. And so it looks like, unfortunately, it's getting close to that time for Mitch. He's been battling some sort of disease. I can't remember what exactly the disease is that he's been battling. But unfortunately, he's focused on spending time with his family now, and that's the most important thing at this time. But yeah, as we said, we'd like you to join us in the thoughts and prayers being sent to him, as he, rests and, tries to be as comfortable as possible here in what will likely be his final days with us. So, if you want to reach out on social media, he's at Tar Heel Chaplain. That's at Tar Heel CHAPLAIN. And you will be able to send him a message. I would encourage all Tar Heel fans that are watching this edition of the podcast to do that. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. Make sure you head over to the website, heeltoughblog.com. Got a breakdown of the schedule up there for you guys that I just posted earlier this evening. So make sure you go back and check that out for us. It'll go a little more in depth into some of the games that Carolina has on the schedule for this upcoming season. Also, we have you guys covered if there are any other last minute portal additions for Carolina. Don't know how many roster spots are available. I think it's either 1 or 2. So if Carolina does add somebody else, we will, of course, let you know who they do add. And soon we will be going through here on the podcast side of things and looking at where the roster stands at certain positions. So make sure that you guys are sticking around for that. Also on the podcast side of things, Bren Renner going to be joining us again here sometime soon. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out for that edition of the podcast that'll be coming your way. And I'm going to try to get Deems Maye on to talk a little bit about Drake Maye. His son, Deems Maye the third, of course, played with Drake both at Myers Park and now with the and then with the Tar Heels. So certainly a great guest that we can get on to talk about Drake and his run to the Super Bowl. We're going to do that here over the next couple of weeks for you guys. And of course, we will have you covered on everything Drake Maye, Mack Hollins, Chad Surratt in the Super Bowl and everything like that. We'll come on here sometime after the Super Bowl is over and give you guys an update on that. Hopefully be saying congratulations to Drake for winning his first Super Bowl. That would be a really cool moment for both us as Tar Heel fans and us as podcast hosts. So once again, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.